fan for a long time. But now you must pay for disagreeing with me on one single movie. For that, I will destroy all your thumb movies. One by one.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Kino Corner. We're in the thick of Kino-ween now. That sounds weird. It sounds more like I'm calling the band Ween Kino, which they are, rather than changing the name of Halloween to better suit my channel. I don't know what would be a better name. Halakino? No, forget it, it's stupid. I've had many people ask me to cover giallo movies on this channel. In case you're not too familiar with the giallo genre, they're stylized Italian thriller and horror movies that usually are about murder mysteries and often have shocking and bloody violence. Think of them as something between Agatha Christie stories and slashers. The name for the genre, giallo, which means yellow in Italian, stems from Italian murder mystery books having yellow covers. Around Halloween, I usually indulge in Italian horror and in giallo because those movies are often super fun. I love the films of Fulci, Bava, and Argento, with Fulci's film Don't Torture a Duckling occupying the spot as my all-time favorite giallo. Seriously, if you haven't seen that one, go and watch it right now. It's an excellent examination of paranoia, mistrust, and prejudice. Plus, it's pretty brutal. But we're not talking about that movie today. Instead, I want to discuss one of the most interesting films from whom many consider to be the master of giallo, Dario Argento. Most people know him as the director of Suspiria, but he was a prolific giallo and horror director, creating classics like Deep Red, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Inferno, Tenebrae, and Phenomena. And for all the haters out there who don't like Phenomena, you're wrong. It's great. It might be goofy as all hell because it's a film about Jennifer Connelly having a psychic connection to insects and she uses her powers to track down a killer with a super smart monkey as her sidekick. But, I mean, what's not to love? But the film we're discussing today is my favorite of Argento's films, and a movie that many claim was his last great film, Opera, also known as Terror at the Opera. I like Opera better. It's cleaner. Before we talk about Opera, though, I have a question for all of you. Are you artists? Do you have experience in UI or UX? The company I work for, Fudo, is having a contest for all UI and UX designers. We're looking for someone who can bring great style to our apps. The grand prize is $5,000 and a big chance at a full-time position here. It's only open to US residents who are over 18 years old who can legally work here. So if you're interested in applying, you can learn more at contest.fudo.org. Now back to the video. Opera follows a young singer, Betty, who finds herself starring as Lady Macbeth in the opera Verdi's Macbeth after a car struck the previous star. She's worried about taking on this role, though, as she's a believer in Macbeth's curse. She has a right to be afraid, as after her first performance, she becomes the target of a sadistic stalker. This stalker doesn't intend to hurt her, at least not yet. No, he ties her up, puts needles under her eyes, and forces her to watch him as he butchers the people close to her. The murders are brutal, and she has no choice but to witness them. This aspect of the film wasn't originally going to be in the movie, but rather Argento joked about wanting to give audiences bits of scotch tape with needles so that they couldn't close their eyes while watching opera. He scrapped that idea and instead had Betty wear the eye needles. It's basically like the killer here is subjecting Betty to his own version of the Clockwork Orange Ludovico technique. Stop it, please, I beg you! But what's the purpose of it? We'll get to that later. The result is that she lives in constant fear. The killer is masked, so she doesn't know who's perpetrating these murders, and so she grows to distrust everyone around her. The police are ineffective and might be in on the plot, and the people putting on the opera, they all seem to care more about keeping the show going rather than capturing the killer. In effect, she's basically totally alone. I will say that the killer is pretty easy to spot in this one. Like all well-structured murder mysteries, Argento introduces the killer in the first act. We're introduced to a host of characters who could be the potential culprits. The singer that Betty replaced, the horror movie director Marco, the awkward police inspector Santini, and a number of stagehands and actors. We know that the singer is jealous of Betty, and the film makes us think that she might be the killer, as she sends Betty a bottle of perfume that Betty thinks to potentially be poison.
What do you think it is?
Who knows? Frog slime? Acid? Poison?
Turns out it's just bad perfume. People working on the opera describe Marco as a sadistic director.
You're a sadist.
Oh, really?
Everyone I know who knows you says the same thing.
That must be very boring for you.
So could he be the killer? Is this all part of a ploy to force Betty into a certain emotional state? Did his career of making horror movies pervert his mind? The Inspector Santini is surely a good guy, right? What would his motivations be? However, he does present himself as a fan first and policeman second. So maybe he has some weird parasocial relationship with Betty.
You're a fan of mine.
Yes.
The first.
It also could be anyone else who's working on the opera. Perhaps there's bad blood somewhere, or one of them is just insane. But for now, who the killer is doesn't matter. For all intents and purposes, the killer is none other than Dario Argento. Or maybe it's us. More so than his other films, voyeurism plays a huge role in this movie. The opening shot is of a crow's eye. In it, we see a reflection of the opera stage. With this shot, Argento is explicitly telling us what the movie is about. It's about the act of viewing. How do we view this movie? Much of the film is shot traditionally, but Argento utilizes POV shots extensively throughout the movie. The opening scene is shot almost entirely from the point of view of the singer. We watch the argument from her eyes. There are also many parts of the film shot from the point of view of the killer. Shooting the murder scenes from the viewpoint of the black leather-gloved killer is a giallo staple. It adds a lot to the style of the films and also hides the killer's identity. But in opera, it's elevated because of the movie's themes. In the killing scenes, we witness the murders in 3 different ways. From the eyes of the murderer, from Betty's eyes, and from the more objective perspective of the camera. In these scenes, we're both the killer, the unwitting witness, and the voyeur. We're committing the crime, we're being forced to watch it, and we want to watch it. In that way, it's like the ultimate form of voyeurism. Are we causing the violence, or are we just witnesses to it? Are we not responsible, but our own morbid curiosity gives the killer enough reason to kill? Is he killing merely for our own pleasure? Spoiler alert, turns out he is. We learn in the third act that Inspector Santini is the killer. Marco, the director of the opera, devises a plan to find out who the villain is. It's a bit of a fantastical plan, but you have to accept a certain level of fantasy or heightened reality in a lot of Argento's films. You see, earlier in the movie, the killer murdered a number of crows. He didn't murder a whole murder of crows, but just a couple of them. Okay, I'm being a bit silly right now, but the point is that the crows did not forgive him, and they certainly did not forget.
Well, ravens are very vindictive. They don't forget. They remember for years and years, and at the right moment, zap.
So the idea is that the crows will remember the bad guy, and they'll attack him, thus revealing his identity to everyone in the audience. They do find the killer, but I find how they catch him to be interesting. We see the crows initially act confused, not knowing what exactly they're supposed to do, but one crow flies out of the cage and starts the hunt. For that search, we see out of the crow's eyes. The camera flies around the opera house, scanning all the people below it. We strain our eyes to find anyone familiar, anyone we suspect. By this point in the movie, if we've been paying attention, we should know who the villain is. The scene engages the audience in a novel way. It's using the point of view shots to encourage the audience members to catch the film's killer. Furthermore, it's all off the stage. We're looking at the audience, which is perhaps a stand-in for us. Someone among us is the perp. In a way, it's like Argento is taking the voyeurism of the film and turning it on ourselves. I could also just be overthinking this. The crow, and thus the camera, and thus us, find the killer, Inspector Santini, and we violently descend upon him. First one crow, and then the whole murder attacks him. They rip out one of his eyes, and then one crow eats it. Now we get the why. Santini confesses all to Betty. Betty's mom, who was also a singer, had a serious thirst for blood. She had Santini kill for her as she watched, and eventually, he killed her. Those dreams that Betty thought she had, the dreams of her mother's murder, were not dreams, but rather a repressed memory. When Santini saw Betty perform on the stage, something clicked inside of him. He saw Betty's mom in her, and thus he began killing again, but this time for Betty's pleasure. We thought that there were only 5 love languages: words of affirmation, quality time, touch, gift-giving, and acts of service. But have we considered a 6th one? Murder. You know, I guess that could fall under acts of service.
She taught me a cruel little game of killing and torturing. Only then could I have her.
So it seems like Betty's fears about the curse of Macbeth were well-founded. Had she not taken the role, Santini wouldn't have snapped, and those people would still be alive. Considering that opera is a film in which Argento is looking back on his career, I thought long and hard about what Santini's motivations meant. It would have been more obvious if Marco was the killer, as he's essentially a self-insert for Argento. Quick aside, Argento had a brief stint in which he was trying to get an opera produced before he directed this film. It's less obvious when it's the police inspector, but since he is a character in Argento's film, I think that we can assume that there's a bit of the director in this character. He's tying us up and forcing us to watch as he commits these heinous acts of violence before our very eyes. Well, not literally tying us up, but if you want to watch the movie, then you're going to watch these scenes. He's doing it all for our enjoyment. Didn't we like watching the vicious death scenes from his earlier works? Aren't we just like our parents who took their dates to scary movies and maybe made out in the theaters as monsters murdered countless named and unnamed characters? I mean, I don't think we would watch the film if it was just about Betty playing as Lady Macbeth in the opera. I imagine a lot of people would find that pretty boring. I'm not saying that it couldn't be good, but the murders are the reason that audiences bought tickets. That leads us to the controversial end of the movie. I maintained for a long time that the best way to watch opera was to turn it off right before the ending, but I really don't mind the ending anymore. Santini ties Betty up in a small room, but instead of making her watch, he blindfolds her and places a gun in her hand. For this final act, we're stripped of our ability to see, just as his vision is half lost. He spreads gasoline on the floor and lights a match, instructing Betty to shoot him. She shoots, the room goes up in flames, and she manages to escape, leaving his dead and burning body behind. But wait, there's more. The film cuts ahead to the Swiss countryside where she's living with Marco. It's a happy and peaceful life. But guess what? That burning body that we saw wasn't a body at all, but rather a dummy Santini had made of himself. He's on the run, and he's heading straight for Betty. Marco finds her maid murdered, and then a chase ensues.
Run! For God's sake, run!
Betty runs as fast as she can with Santini in hot pursuit. Marco tackles Santini but dies in the struggle, so to save her own skin, Betty confesses that she is just like her mother, and that she thinks that what he did was pretty cool. The end. Well, this was an ending, but Argento ultimately went with the ending that happens right after this scene. Betty incapacitates Santini, the cops catch up to them, and all is well, save for all the people dead at this point. Betty then crawls on the ground and talks about how she's really just a cottagecore girl who likes flowers and insects and butterflies and stuff. It's a strange ending, but it does sort of fit her character. She frees a lizard trapped under a stick and tells it to go free, and in a sense, she's telling herself to go free. She's been weighed down by her past, the trauma put onto her by her mother, which might explain why she has severe intimacy problems, the pressures of the stage, and well, everything else that happens in the movie. Now, however, all that is gone. She's free to live her life, unburdened by what has been. The distributors wanted Argento to cut the whole Swiss countryside ending, but he refused. Argento's ex-partner, Daria Nicolodi, who played as Mira in the movie, agreed with the distributors. Rough.
Il film era bello, ma non mi piaceva il finale e ancora adesso non mi piace. Penso che potesse interrompersi prima di quella passeggiata in Svizzera che non c'entrava nulla.
Speaking of her, there's a funny story from the making of the film involving Daria. She and Dario had broken up a couple years before the filming of the movie. She had acted in a number of his films, from Deep Red to Tenebrae, and Dario saw her as kind of a lucky charm, so he wanted her back for opera. She agreed just because she liked Mira's death in the film. But there is an issue with the death, though. Argento didn't know how they were going to film it. Just a day before her death scene, Argento told her that he had come up with a plan for the shot, putting explosives on the back of her head. Listen, you do not want your ex planting explosives on your head, even if it's for art. She was understandably incredibly nervous to do the scene, saying that she couldn't sleep at all the night before. But thankfully for her, it wasn't a part of Argento's plot to kill his ex, and she survived. Or maybe it was part of a murder plot, and his plan was foiled. No, I don't think that he wanted to kill her.
Who did this to you? Is this another manifestation of the curse of Macbeth?
It's ironic how the film is centered around the Macbeth curse, and the production of the film seemed to be affected by the same curse. Many major actors pulled out of the film right before production. Ian Charleson, who played as Marco, got injured in a traffic accident during the shoot, and as a result, found out that he was HIV positive. The lead actress, Christina Marcelak, who played as Betty, was the hardest actress to work with, according to Argento. Argento's dad passed away while they were filming, and a minor actor got crushed by a car and died. As for that last point, I tried finding the name of the actor who was reportedly killed, but I couldn't. If any Italians in the audience know who it was, or if it's true and not just a movie myth? Let me know in the comments. It's a fantastic horror film with amazing cinematography by Ronnie Taylor and a score composed by Brian Eno, Roger Eno, Claudio Simonetti, Steel Grave, and Bill Wyman. Argento wanted different musicians to tackle different parts of the film so that it would have more of an eclectic feel and so that each part could tonally stand out on its own. The score ranges from classical opera to ambient to hard rock. It's a roller coaster of a soundtrack. That's about it, guys. If you haven't seen the movie, then go check it out. It's hard to find a good physical copy of it here in the US, but it is streaming on Shudder. I watch this film almost every October, along with a bunch of other jolly. They're just fun movies. Anyways, I've been the Kino Corner, and I will see you all in the next video.